and thanks for making this wonderful conference. I thought it would be good to contextualize the project, starting with my office view. Home office is that. But this is about programming in secondary school, and Faith Tveranger, the master student I supervise, she did the actual case study that I will tell you about, but we have other things in here as well. So first, the context, Norway. Karen showed us yesterday that surprisingly the Scandinavian countries, they are not very good at recruiting women to technology. So just very quickly, Norway is actually lagging behind the European average in recruiting women to technology. And this has, of course, been a concern. In 2006, digital competence was included in school, in primary school, as sort of the fifth basic skill, along with reading, writing, math, and oral skills. But still, there was a concern that the kind of digital competence included in school was not really about how technology works, only about how you use it, not how you make it, or produce it. And we have seen coding clubs for children, Kids Code, programming, code.org, and different kind of organizations you have sort of across Europe and other places in the world, have also popped up in Norway since 2013, and they've been a very strong campaigner for introducing programming in school. And finally, in 2016, it was introduced as a pilot, as an elective for secondary school. That's like grade 8 till 10 in Norway. So there has also been a change in sentiment about programming for children, whether it's possible to learn. Children teach children to program at all, or if it's really program or be programmed, it's some vital competence here. In a previous study I was involved in, we saw that the code club instructors, they really saw it like learning, it wasn't about technology, it was about learning how society works. So for them, for the involved people, it was really, really an important competence. So the thing is that if we really accept that programming is important, and somehow someone also in the educational authority thinks so because they actually started this pilot for programming, then of course the challenge we have is to produce inclusive digital competence and education. And we know that cultural images and stereotypes work as barriers for girls. Like this image of, it's sort of the image we grew up with of men doing kind of boring stuff with technology. We also know that age and education matters for how people see technology as interesting or are interested in learning more. So there's something about the background here where Norway is not in the best place to include girls in programming. And so the basic empirical material of the paper we present in the proceedings is the project that Faith Tveranger did with the programming class, which was 8th grade, and a total of 18 boys and 4 girls were in the class, and out of them, 8 boys and 3 girls were recruited as informants. And she was also part of the class, and because this teacher didn't really have any background in programming, and she came out of computer science, so she also became like an assistant. So she was there for nearly 7 months, I think, participating in this class. So she had a good opportunity to get to know the pupils. We also did a survey among the pilot schools to find out how many girls and boys were part of the programming pilot. And when I contacted the educational department responsible for the national pilot and asked if I could have these numbers, they said, no, we don't know, we never asked. So we thought, okay, we just have to ask. And they have a short report from the pilot as well that we use as part of the material. So the theoretical approach, I don't think I will say much about it because you said it so well in the previous presentation. We are in the same place. We don't accept that these things, the lack of women is a natural necessity. It's a cultural construction that we need to deal with as a social cultural construction. Sandra Harding's way of seeing gender as symbolic in an individual and structural level were mentioned yesterday, at least in one of the talks I were attending. And that's also important here, I think, to recognize that gender is it's not these girls that we are talking about that's the problem, it's the structures and the symbols they meet. So, in the interviews with the pupils in the programming class, we found that they experienced programming as quite varied, and one of them says, I think you can make it out to be really easy or really hard, it depends on what you are doing. So they found programming, and they used mostly Scratch, which is sort of this block-based programming language where you don't have to actually write the code, you move blocks and build the programming code. And they found that to be fun and less complicated than they expected. Like one of the girls said, I thought it would be more difficult. And that reminds me of also of a previous study I did with computer science students, where in particular the women kept saying that they were surprised that they could manage. So this is too small a material to generalize, but it's an echo of something. And they also found it closer to human language. They could actually understand this. When we talk about computers and we keep saying that computers communicate with zeros and ones, it's completely incomprehensible, but this is possible to understand. And they definitely, many of them said that this was an important skill. It was something they needed in their future jobs, etc. So they had them, the pupils that were in the class saw this as both interesting and important. We know that there are studies saying that gaming is sort of a door opener to computer science and programming, and most of the pupils in the class also claimed to be gamers, also the girls, or they used computer games, played computer games. But there's also a link going back from gaming to programming in this case, but also from programming back to gaming, because they could program their own games. And that's one of the things in particular the boys found to be interesting about this. And during the class, we also saw that the pupils changed their mind about how they would sort of relate to computing in the future. Like this last quote here from one of the girls, now I really want to work with something that has to do with computers. I really want to be an architect. And then you have to work on computer and know things about it. So while some of the boys were like, they wanted to work with programming, making games in particular, they could imagine that. The girls mentioned other things, realizing that computers were an important part of these other jobs in the future. So again, this is not a huge material, so we can't really generalize, but the girls in this class, they all had family members who did work with computers or had a particular interest in computers, and they referred to that, like, my father used to program, or my brother did something. So having some kind of people near you that are interested seems to be important for them. They are absolutely aware of the low proportion of girls that are part of the programming class, but they explain it as a matter of choice, that girls are interested in doing other things. And not a matter of abilities. And that's also one thing we found in a previous study with a programming club, a code club, that the children, they do see that there are few girls, but they do not think girls are less clever in programming or have less abilities in making code than the boys. So the children talk in a much less gender stereotype way than the adults and the teachers and the parents. And that is why we also find it worth at least to ask if these young pupils could be somehow change agents, because we see that they have inherited some of the cultural stereotypes of girls and boys and programming, but they open them up also. Like Alexandra in the bottom says, I think it's for everybody. I just think that it hasn't been an option to do it in school for so long. So I think that later, if you inform the pupils of it at a young age, more will enjoy it. So if these pupils, if these young boys and girls had an arena where there weren't sort of grown-ups setting the stereotypes, which I think they very often do, they could be change agents. And of course, I have to say, you read it probably, Adrian, it's for everybody. Programming, it's for everybody, because everybody can learn to program. So if boys can, and men can program, so can girls. So the children are really sort of fighting for everyone's right to do this. The teachers there was one teacher in our study, and he did not have a background in programming. And the teachers in the pilot at all, the larger pilot, 63 of them felt they had adequate competence. Only 39 had formal competence. And from other contact we've had with schools, it's not all the pilot schools, they can't raise their own teachers. So some of the schools borrow teachers from, for instance, higher educational institution, and that's probably not always very successful, with someone coming in with all the computer science principles and engineering knowledge and meeting the local teachers who have none of that, and they make this scale of knowledge become from 0 to really like 7 years at university. So that also makes this a problematic pilot. And the teacher in our class, he was aware he didn't have enough background and thought he would have done a better job with more competence. And he also talked about the pupils in a way we have found in other studies, again, that the grown-ups, they are more stereotyping in a way. He said that the girls are probably better in programming in his class. They are more focused than the average pupil. So this is just a question. If this, of course, we don't know. But in the way that the teachers we have met talk about the pupils, they often seem to just build on ideas we have about girls being good and nice and sitting still, being focused, and the boys are running around. And some of that is, of course, what's actually going on. But it also seems to be a tendency of talking about how we normally talk about, the same way we normally talk about children, boys and girls. So the overall numbers from the programming pilot in the survey we did show that the first one is for the both years, 16-17 and 17-18, where a total of 16.5% girls were part of the pilot. And the second and third are for the first and the second year of the pilot. And you can see that the numbers are going down from more than 18 to less than 50% girls. So they actually lose girls in this pilot, in the national. This is the national picture. More than 50% of the schools participated, and it's very clear, the results are very clear from this survey. There are no schools with more girls than boys. There are 3 schools and more than 100 classes, single programming classes, with no girls. There are no classes with no boys. So the tendency is very, very clear in the survey. There was no talk about gender in the pilot. So the facts and what you get from a gender-blind strategy. You might have seen this before. So if we look at what we have, programming is male-dominated in numbers. We know that. And this programming class was launched as an elective. The children were supposed to select it themselves, and in school they are very... we have the Norwegian sort of unitary system where everybody is supposed to be similar and equal, and the children were supposed to choose completely free of no bindings from anyone. And we had teachers with little experience, and in many schools, the teachers that were appointed to do this were the brave enough teachers that could deal with computers, and often that would be men, but without competence, formal competence. And there was absolutely no gender inclusion strategy. And that's where we come to treating everyone similar, thinking that that has to do with equality. Creates sort of what we refer to as hidden gender ordering processes, which creates inequality. So this idea of equality has an output which is inequality. And a low proportion of girls shouldn't surprise anyone. And that's what we call this a wasted opportunity of including girls. And what could have been done differently? Awareness, of course. I've been traveling around and talking with many of the programming schools lately, and they have no idea about, for instance, they have never heard of a Grace Murray Hopper or the ENIAC women, or that women actually did do a lot of programming in the 50s. They are like jaw-dropping when I tell them about this. So awareness, point 1. And also try to sort of make this, the lack of women becomes invisible, because that's what we normally see, so we don't see it anymore. And if it's normal, it doesn't need to be fixed. We have to get rid of that. And we have to recognize the connection between stereotypes and interests. And that's another thing the teachers and schools keep telling me. But you have to remember, the girls just aren't interested. And it's been suggested that actually visually changing the environment, make sure that it's inclusive, and maybe adding more blomster flowers could help. And again, like the youth we see, they are producing some other discourses. We just need to make space for them. And to make new and diverse role models. You probably know this I Look Like an Engineer campaign, where she is, I can't remember her name, you can Google her. She was mistaken to be just a model posing in an ad as an engineer. An engineer can't look like that. Well, she can. And we often hear of this Nordic paradox of how in the Nordic countries we are so good at gender equality, but we can't get women in technology and we can't get them in high positions. But in this particular case, it's not a paradox. It's actually a choice of not dealing with gender. It's an effect of the choice that the educational authorities make. So, thank you, with my favorite picture of Grace Murray Hopper, where she is actually in this very male-dominated, Navy-situated room with her embroideries. Thank you.